Okay, we're live, gang. How's everybody doing tonight? This is our last week of our Get Lean in 2016 program. Tonight we're going to finish up with a little bit about carbohydrates. And carbohydrates are an important fuel source. They're one of three macronutrients like protein and fats. Sorry. That's right, my daughter's just walking by. I know we haven't actually gone live yet, but I'm just kind of waiting for people to join in. And tonight we're going to talk about, some of the benefits of carbohydrate, but how certain carbohydrates can cause disease, type 2 diabetes, hypertension, high cholesterol, and it can accelerate weight gain. So there's a right time to, eat carbohydrates, and there's other times that you might want to avoid. There are certain carbohydrates that you want to consume and enjoy. There's others that you may want to eliminate from your diet because they're taking you down the wrong path. So today was the first day of a program that I'm doing. It's in cooperation with Jen Widerstrom. Everybody knows Jen from The Biggest Loser. Jen Widerstrom also happens to be my partner in ID Life, and she is an investor and a celebrity trainer. So she's an investor in ID Life. She's also an associate in ID Life, which means that she is building a team of associates who represent the product. So it's all pretty cool to have her on the team and see what she's doing with her contestants on The Biggest Loser and how she's really focusing not just on weight loss, but optimizing their health. Now, I've had a couple clients over the years who have gone on some real strict weight loss programs. They've over-exercised and they didn't eat enough. And what happens is the body goes through a process, and you heard me speak about this a couple times over the last couple of weeks, called gluconeogenesis. And it's a big fancy term, but gluco is sugar, neo is new, and genesis is creation. So it's the creation of new sugar. And your body will break down protein to convert it to, take protein and convert it to carbohydrate in order to feed your brain and nervous system. So we've had situations where people have gone on intermittent, chronic, low-calorie diets, and actually it has affected their heart muscle, because again, muscle is protein, and they've caused irregularities in their heartbeat, so much so that they had to have a procedure done called a cardiac ablation. What a cardiac ablation is basically the surgeon goes in and actually kills a little bit of the muscle, heart muscle, to try to put it back into a normal sinus rhythm. So if they're going in there to do an ablation on you, you know that you've had a lot of heart damage. Another thing I want to share with you this week that I found out about was how men of Northern European descent have to be mindful of the iron content of their blood. There's something that's known as a Celtic curse, and it's where your body starts to absorb more iron than it can handle. And in worst case scenarios, there's actually a disease process called hemochromatosis. And that's when the body will absorb over 4 times the normal amount of iron that it should. And the only way to eliminate iron in your blood is, in your blood, we'll use that, is to donate blood frequently, probably about once every 56 days, or even sooner than that. You can actually donate blood every month if you had to try to knock your iron count down. So what we're suggesting is that men of Irish, excuse me, Irish or Northern European descent, when they go for their physical, make sure that the doctor is evaluating their iron ferritin levels. And if they're a little bit elevated, you might want to start to think about eating a lower iron diet and also donate blood more frequently. So I've already put in my schedule for next week to donate blood. This is our last week of this call, so I'll be there next Monday night donating, and I'm putting myself on a every 3 months donation schedule moving forward. Even though I don't necessarily have not been diagnosed with this issue. I just want to play it safe. So I want to thank my friend Paul Sullivan, who suggested this to me. And again, when I go for my physical in March, I'm going to be mindful about getting that done. And of course, with my diet bet against Jen Widerstrom, today I had a protein shake for breakfast. I had a protein shake for lunch, and tonight I had my starch with my dinner. I had a lamb stew. It had a lot of good vegetables in it, and it had starchy carbohydrate in it. So I'm going to talk a lot about that tonight and why I choose to add starch with my evening meal. So I have 1:32 here, and I think everyone's in, so I'm going to just start talking. And at the end of the night, as always, I'll go into Facebook and we can chat if anybody has questions. So everyone's looking at this slide now, and we have starchy carbohydrates versus fibrous carbohydrates. So let's start on the far left side where it says refined grains. Those would be things like highly processed flour, white flour, that's made into what? Donuts, muffins, waffles, pancakes, bread, Italian bread. Okay, these are highly refined, so much so that most of the good nutrients have been removed in the processing. They're also very low in fiber and very, very low in water. And these are the kind of starches or grains that are very rapidly going to elevate blood sugar. And when the blood sugar goes up to a certain level, what do we know? The body doesn't like high levels of sugar, so it will start to convert some of the sugar to VLDL style cholesterol and store it in your arterial linings. Now, people talk to me all the time about cholesterol, ingesting cholesterol and butter and eggs and bacon and red meat and all that kind of stuff. You can't eat enough cholesterol in comparison to what your liver can produce in cholesterol by eating too much sugar. Let me see if I can kind of quantify that a little bit. You can't eat enough butter, eggs, red meat in comparison, and get cholesterol from that in comparison to what your liver can produce in cholesterol when it's stimulated by high levels of sugar. It pales in comparison. The other thing you have to know is that when you eat fats in certain foods, the LDL molecule that comes from that is very big, it's very light, and it's very fluffy, and it's very easily eliminated by your HDL. The type of cholesterol that's developed when you eat too much sugar, the VLDL type cholesterol, which is also people talk about as the dangerous cholesterol, okay? It's very small, it's very dense, and it's very sticky, and it easily adheres to arterial walls, and it's very difficult to get rid of. So we want to focus on not eating refined grains for a multitude of reasons. I don't care whether you think you need to lose weight or not. We probably want to stay away from things where most of the nutrients have been removed from the food. Now, in the turn of the century, not this century, obviously, with the going from the 1800s into the early 1900s, we had a world war back in 1917, 1918. And I don't think many people know this, but many of the soldiers that were applying for service in World War I were turned away because of malnutrition. The processing of food and the Industrial Revolution had started so much so that a lot of the nutrients were being milled out of the food. And they were trying to figure out why are these people coming down with all these vitamin deficiency diseases like beriberi, which is a vitamin B deficiency. So they discovered what the problem was. So instead of changing the milling process, they decided they were going to just start to add vitamins and minerals back into the food, and that's what's called enriching. So when Wonder Bread came out, which is a bread that a lot of us ate when we were young kids, especially if you're over 50, what did it say? It says Wonder Bread builds bodies in 8 ways, and it's enriched wheat flour, which means it's had vitamins added to it so that we can start to at least avoid disease. Now, the vitamins that are added back in pale in comparison to what was there before the milling process, but at least we put a halt to some of these vitamin deficiency diseases. Now, you've heard me talk a lot about this in the past with the nutrition insurance talks that we did early on, that there's a big difference between just avoiding disease and thriving. The human body, would like to be more in an optimal phase, not a minimal phase. I'll give you an example. People say, well, let's look at guys, for example, with their testosterone level. They say, well, I fell in the average range. Well, the average range is between 1 and 350. You show me a guy who's at 100, he can barely get out of the chair. You show me a guy who's at 350, he can run through a brick wall, but they're both considered to be in the normal range. So you just don't want to just get by. Nobody likes just getting by. Nobody likes to just barely pass for, with regards to their health or their wealth or anything like that. You want to be robust. You want to be thriving. So we have to make sure that we're having optimal nutrition in the foods we eat. And the problem is when we eat foods that do not have optimal nutrition, the brain nervous system is still looking for more nutrition. So what does it cause you to do? It increases the hunger drive and you end up eating too much. So we have an obese population that's malnourished. That's like an oxymoron. That doesn't make any sense. How can you be overweight and malnourished? Well, if you're eating a lot of your calories in refined grains, you're going to have too many calories with no nutrients in them. So that's why we have this slide up. So let's take a shift to the right here. We're moving from refined grains into whole grains. So here we see the sugar content start to drop a little bit. The fiber starts going up, but you notice the water is still very low. So what do we talk about when we talk about putting a meal together? We talk about protein, we talk about fiber, and we talk about water. Those are the first three things we want to put into a meal plan. So if we're eating foods that are very low in water, well, that doesn't do us very good at all. So we're getting a little better. Now instead of having the refined grains, we're still getting a whole grain, but we're still having a very, very high sugar content. These are foods, again, if you're looking for optimal health, weight loss, avoid disease, these still are not foods we want to include in our diet. Let's take a little step to the right here. And now we start hitting fruits. Fruits are going to be much lower in sugar, a little higher in fiber, but look at the water content. We really maxed out there with the water content. So again, these are going to be better choices. And then finally on the far right, we have vegetables. Vegetables have lower sugar content. They also have more fiber and, again, a good amount of water. But we need to quantify this, and we will a little bit. We're going to go a little deeper with regards to vegetables because a potato is a vegetable and broccoli is a vegetable. And they're going to give you two different hormonal responses when you eat them, okay? So I won't talk much about that now. Just know when we start getting into vegetables, they're going to be the starchy carbohydrates, which are going to be like your potatoes, your oatmeal, your rice, and then we have who left Facebook open on my page here? And then we have the green vegetables. I have Facebook things popping up, guys. I'm sorry about that. I'll get rid of that. I didn't know Facebook was still open on this computer. All right, I'm trying to knock that off if they come up. But the green vegetables are something that we're going to want to have more of because they're going to give us our nutrients, they're going to give us our fiber, they're going to give us our water, and they're going to have minimal amount of sugar. But there is a point in time where you want to include starches in your meal plan. I'll get into that in a few minutes. Okay, so let's talk about what happens when we combine fat and sugar. Now, the food manufacturers kind of know this. They know that if they can put fat and sugar and salt together in the same food, they can get anybody to eat anything. And I'll give you a perfect example of that. chicken nuggets are very, very popular kid. Chicken nuggets and French fries, right? And there's a lot of fast food restaurants that specialize in chicken nuggets and French fries. So we look at the chicken. It's a protein, but it's breaded. So we have our first start of our starch, our refined grain, for lack of better terms, milled flour that's put on the outside of the chicken. Then it's deep fried. All right, so now we're adding fat into the situation. And then, of course, what do they put on it? Well, when it comes out, they put ketchup on it, right? And they put a little salt on it. So we have fat, we have salt, we have sugar. Now, the French fries are even worse. Here we do have a starchy carbohydrate potato. It's deep fried, and then they put salt on it. And guess what else people put on French fries? Ketchup. And what does ketchup have? It's loaded with sugar. So again, we're setting up what Susan would refer to as a fat bomb. In other words, your body's going to react to that, and the way it's going to react to that is to gain weight. So it says when it comes to adding fat to starch or sugar, the issue is that these foods are not only the most calorie dense, but they may negatively impact biochemistry in such a way that it causes increased food intake at the current meal and craving for high calorie foods at future meals. So we always say that to people. It's not what happens to you right then at that meal. What happens 2 hours later when that blood sugar starts to drop and you start to go into feed overdrive? A lot of these foods cause an exaggerated insulin response. The insulin doesn't go up to match the amount of food you ate. It goes even higher than that. And what did we say about insulin a couple of weeks ago? Insulin is like a heat-seeking missile. It will continue to be active until it finds something to work upon. So if you over-exaggerate your insulin response, okay, and you secrete enough insulin to handle the food intake plus some, okay, now the insulin is looking for something to work on. There's no food left, so what does it start to break down? What sugar is it looking for now? It starts to work on blood sugar. It causes that blood sugar to start to be stored as fat. So what does the brain perceive? The brain perceives, there's not enough sugar to run the brain and nervous system, so guess what you need to do? You need to eat to get your calories back up again, to get more sugar in the system so that this insulin can do something. Well, that creates a real problem because now you say, well, you just ate 2 hours ago. What do you mean you're hungry now? That's because your insulin reaction was so over-exaggerated. Not only did it meet the needs of the food you ate, but it over-exaggerated, and now it started breaking down blood sugar. Blood sugar drops. The brain perceives this. It increases the hunger drive. I hope that makes sense. And again, we're going to spend some time in Facebook afterwards so we can talk a little bit more. Okay, so let's talk about fats and weight gain. Animal studies show these foods have a hedonistic effect, causing animals not to be able to regulate their hunger and craving centers. These foods may also be the reason behind the concept of food addiction. Eliminating these foods from the diet is often one of the most powerful things a person can do. In our experience, it takes a few weeks to break free from this spell, but when it happens, it can literally free some people from a lifetime of food struggles. Now, one of the things that I'm going to have to put out there for everyone to see, because I know some people have seen it, but not everybody. We have something called a sputter effect. And I don't think I have a slide on this, so let me talk about it here. Sputter effect is when your body goes from predominantly burning sugar to moving towards fat burning, okay? And what happens is about a 24 to 48 hour period where that conversion starts to take place. So if anyone's ever been on a boat that has 2 gas tanks, and one of the gas tanks starts to run a little dry, the engine starts to stall, it starts to sputter a little bit, and then the captain flips the switch to open up the valve to let the second gas tank start to pour gasoline into the engine, and the engine starts running again. But in that little interim time, it sputters. Same thing happens in us, okay? So we know that we're going to have a little bit of a tough time when we move from burning predominantly sugar to burning fat. And some people can't get past that sputter effect. They have anxiety, they have headaches, they feel dizzy, they feel nauseous. So we have a remedy to get you over that sputter effect. And the remedy is something called branched chain amino acids. Branched chain amino acids are proteins. Now, what do we know about proteins? What can happen to a protein? Protein can be broken down and made into sugar to feed the brain and nervous system. So we have a post-recovery drink that we have through ID Life that has branched chain amino acids. It also has creatine in it. Creatine is a energy compound that helps the cells draw in more water and more sugar to be burned for energy. So anything that has a branched chain amino acid base with creatine, and also ours happens to have chelates in it. Chelates helps the creatine to be more effective. So that's how we tell people to get over their sputter effect, to drink some post-recovery drink. Now, that will be a pretty quick fix and should help people immediately. But we have something even better. If you have something that's going to be a longer lasting or longer acting product, you probably want to take that so that you don't hit the sputter effect so hard. You already kind of have it in place. We have a product called Lean. Lean is a tablet form that does the same thing. It delivers branched chain amino acids plus other nutrients to allow you to go through the sputter effect without the nausea and the headache and the anxiety and all that kind of stuff. So look for a good quality branched chain amino acid to help with sputter effect. Okay, that's my little talk on branched chain amino acids. So now I'm still on slides with fat and sugar. Again, these foods are not detrimental for every person, talking about fats and sugars together, but given the issues with calories and brain chemistry, it is best to eliminate them or avoid them completely if your goal is weight loss and stabilize blood sugar. These foods include things like cakes, cookies, pastries, but it can also include things like pasta, cream sauce, pizza, bagels with cream cheese, French fries, and burgers. All the fun stuff, right? Mike, you're terrible. You're taking all my fun away. You know what? Feeling strong and looking good is better than anything ever tastes. So let's look at it in those terms. Now, let's talk about potatoes. Ironically, a potato can be a great fat loss food when it's eaten in its plain form. But in the Western society, it's almost never eaten this way, and instead it's loaded with fat and salt and more sugar because everyone puts ketchup on their French fries. Let's talk about how stress comes into play with this. Now, there's physical stress, there's mental stress. When you have too much sugar in your system, that is a physical stress. Now we add lack of sleep, which is a mental and physical and emotional stressor, and the stress we encounter at work. Okay, your brain is very metabolic. So what happens when your brain is working at an exaggerated rate? It's burning more what? Sugar, because that's its fuel source. So we have imbalanced blood sugar, and you're going through a stressful situation, along with cortisol. Cortisol levels start to go up. It's going to affect your hunger and your cravings, and it's going to cause you to look for more sugary, fat, and salty foods. So it says your weight loss is more than calories. If it was simple as calories, the obesity problem would be much more solvable. But there was other factors involving the weight battle: sleep deprivation and chronic stress. Both negatively impact fat loss, even though they in fact are calorie-free. There's no calories to sleep. There's no calories involved with stress. You can't eat them, yet they impact whether we store fat or burn it. They also dramatically impact our hunger, motivation to work out, and cravings. So while it's true that calorie excess is required to gain weight, just as calorie deficits are required to lose it, it is short-sighted to pretend other factors don't impact fat gain. Okay, so this is a little slide here about some poor guy sitting in the corner. You know, how many times have I had people in my office come to me and they say, the doctor yelled at me, he's telling me I'm cheating on my diet. Now, I'm not cheating on my diet, I'm eating exactly what he told me to eat, and so on and so forth, all right? So where does that come from? It comes from the fact that certain people are not educated in nutrition, and they say, well, you know what, get up in the morning, you know, we're trying to lower your weight, we're trying to lower your cholesterol, so what you need to do is have a nice big bowl of oatmeal, which is high in fiber. And while you're at it, why don't you add some blueberries to it, okay? And, you know, well, so you'll have fruit and yogurt not fruit and yogurt, listen to me, fruit and oatmeal for breakfast. Well, what did you just give someone? You just gave them 2 carbohydrates without any fat and without any protein. So what is going to be the net outcome of that meal for someone who has trouble metabolizing sugar and converting it to energy? They're going to store it as fat. Have a salad for lunch. Great. Let's make sure we put some protein in there. And if it's a green salad, yes, go ahead and add fats like avocado or good olive oil-based dressing, because there's no starch in it. What we're trying to, Mike, it sounds like double talk. No, listen to me. What we're trying to do is we're trying to give you fats without starch and starch without fats. Does that make sense? We're trying to separate the two so that they don't meet at the same time. And that will help you to keep your blood sugar balanced, and it'll stop the negative effect of the hormones that want to store fat when the two of them are put together. I'll get to that in a few more minutes. But anyway, long story short, let's not yell at people. Let's not berate them. Let's work with them. Let's teach them how to fix themselves and support them. Because anybody else is just really being rude by telling someone they lack willpower and they're yelling at them and so forth. Let's try to focus on the positives. All right, here's a big problem. We've talked about this for a couple of weeks. The eat less, exercise more model. Eating less, exercising more is not the answer. I think I've kind of proved that to you over the last couple of weeks. In fact, fat gain and weight loss are multifactorial and individual. It involves understanding individual genetics, unique metabolic expression, physiological sensitivities or psychological sensitivities, and even personal preferences. Okay? So what's the fat gain formula? We know that high fat, along with high sugar, combined with stress, is a recipe for fat gain. I'm going to get into the correlation of cortisol and insulin in a few minutes. This is, of course, is an oversimplification explanation for fat gain, but it's a useful model in understanding weight gain. Sure, you can get fat overeating anything. On that fact, we agree, except it's virtually impossible for any free-living human who gorges on chicken and greens to do so. It just won't happen. So whenever you combine the high fats and the high starches or the high sugars together, okay, what happens is you set off a hormonal storm of hormones that are going to store fat and hormones that are going to slow down fat burning. So we have hormone-sensitive lipase and lipoprotein lipase. I didn't want to get into all the different hormones, but just know that we have hormones whose job is to store fat, and we have hormones whose job is to burn fat. Let me just give you a quick example, something you've heard already, so it's not going to throw you off. Okay, when you take insulin, okay, and you take cortisol and you bring them together, you set up an opportunity for you to store fat. Okay, now people say, well, that's not good. Why does that happen? Well, there was a point in your genetic past where you didn't eat every day and food was not plentiful. So when you came across that situation, your body had the ability to store fat just in case you don't eat the next day. Because your body's not about, being an Olympic athlete. It really starts to focus on survival. And it's a survival need for you to gain fat so that you don't starve. I mean, look at, let's use an animal as an example. Let's look at a squirrel. Okay, squirrels and birds, because it's the middle of winter now, but don't they look big and fat right now? I just saw some birds the other day. Got warm. It was warm today in New Jersey, about 50 degrees. And these little finches, they're huge. Okay, they're storing a lot of body fat. Keeps them warm, keeps them fed over the winter time. Okay, but let's use squirrels as an example. If you take a squirrel that's in a cage and you take a wild squirrel, okay, now again, this is genetics. This isn't just diet. And you take that squirrel and you start to run into October, okay, they start gaining weight. Their weight goes up even though they're not necessarily increasing their food intake. And that'll continue all the way into December. And then they kind of go into a hibernation where they're not eating every day. And they're living off that body fat probably sometime until about end of February, beginning of March, when they can start to go out and hunt and gather and scavenge for food again. Okay, so that's not a calorie in, calorie out thing. That's a hormonal shift, and they do that for survival. So we have the ability to do the same thing. If we eat foods that are high in fat and high in starch, our body is designed to store fat because somewhere in our genetic past, we had to be able to do that to survive. Conversely, when we put cortisol, which is not a bad hormone, it's a hormone just like any other hormone, and we take cortisol and we mix it with human growth hormone, we set up a fat burning scenario. And that's why we do the high intensity metabolic interval style training, because we get the stress levels up from the high intensity training. So we do raise cortisol levels a little bit, but guess what we do? We also dump in a lot of human growth hormone from getting a breathless and burning, hot and heavy environment with our exercise. And when you combine human growth hormone with cortisol, you start to burn fat at an accelerated rate. So the diet is set up to limit insulin and cortisol being together, or make it moderate so that you survive, but not gain a lot of weight. But we really want to get the high impact with the cortisol and the human growth hormone, because that's going to help you to get leaner and stronger and healthier and all that good stuff. Okay? I hope that makes sense. And I'm trying not to do too much high intensity with the different hormones and enzymes and all that. I try to cut back on those a little bit. So now people talk about the Atkins diet as being a high-fat diet, and it really is. But what aren't they putting in an Atkins diet? They're not putting starchy carbohydrates. People say there's no carbs in an Atkins diet. Well, that's not necessarily true. The carbohydrates they put in are going to be more like broccoli, spinach, cauliflower, romaine lettuce, kale, collard greens, green beans, asparagus, Brussels sprouts. Okay, you see my point? We're going with carbohydrates, but they're very high in fiber, they're very high in water, and very low in sugar. Okay, and we're mixing that with fat and protein, and that helps someone to lose weight. But if you take that same high fat and you mix it with rice and potatoes and oatmeal, I'm trying to think of beans, or another one that's high in fat and high in carbs. Okay, those are going to cause you to gain weight. So you really have to look at the fat plus the sugar along with the stress. And that's why we tend to overeat when we're stressed out, because our blood sugar starts to drop really low. So we start to eat anything we can get our hands on. That's why you have to try to plan these things ahead of time. So the high fat and sugar combination creates the exact opposite changes in the hunger signaling molecules in the brain and results in an insatiable hunger that continues. Ironically, this changes almost the exact pattern we see in starvation. Very interesting there. We can see that high fat, high sugar foods are not just simply high calorie, but they also cause us to lose our ability to regulate and suppress hunger. Okay, so that's an important thing. And as Susan says, then we add chronic stress. On top of this, we create the perfect fat storing atomic bomb. That's Susan's definition. So let's talk about carbohydrates, a little bit about the confusion that goes on. So we know that eliminating carbohydrates isn't the answer. Manipulating your intake of them and knowing how they impact your body is. So don't ask yourself whether you should be eating carbs, ask when you should be eating carbs. Let's get into some of the things that people do to try to manipulate their carbohydrate intake, and along with the fats and the proteins that go along. So we tell you to eat all the carbs from the green list of foods in an unlimited fashion. You can eat broccoli, cauliflower, asparagus, Brussels sprouts, green beans, romaine lettuce, kale, spinach, as much as you can all day long. And those are the type of carbs you can eat with fat. So have some spinach with olive oil, a little bit of garlic, okay? That's not going to be a fat-storing food, as opposed to you taking olive oil and pouring it all over a baked potato, if that makes sense. Or taking a baked potato and smothering it with sour cream and chives or butter. Okay, you can see how that can become a fat-storing type situation. Okay. Let's just go ahead and move on to the next one. Okay. So again, in Asian countries, why is it that they eat all this rice and they remain thin? Because they don't add a lot of salt and fat to those meals. Except when you get Chinese food in the United States where they load up the rice with fats. You know, so keep in mind, you know, when I was talking to, who was I talking to? Someone the other day I was with, and they were talking about what Chinese food they should be eating because they like Chinese food. And I said, you know, anything that has a glaze on it is probably going to be loaded with sugar. And if you eat that with brown rice, you're going to set up a fat storing metabolism as opposed to a fat burning metabolism. So if you're going to go to a Chinese restaurant, you want to get steamed chicken and broccoli, sauce on the side, because the sauce is probably going to have sugar in it. If you can get away with just eating the chicken and the broccoli and the excuse me, and the rice with no sauce on it, that's not going to be a bad dinner, okay? But as soon as the sauce goes on the chicken, now that combines with the rice, you got the starch, you got sugar, you got fat, because most of that stuff is deep fried. You're setting up a fat storing metabolism. Let's talk a little bit about carb tipping point. You know, I want you to close your eyes and I want you to envision a mountain and a guy climbing up the mountain. And his goal is to get to the top without going over the other side. So sometimes when we're in a situation where people aren't eating enough carbohydrate in their diet, they're still climbing the mountain and they haven't hit the top. And because they're so deprived in carbohydrate, they end up sliding back down, never reaching the top. So that's not good. We know eating too little can be just as detrimental to you as eating too much. The goal is to be able to figure out how much carbohydrate you can eat during the course of the day and stay at the top without going over the top. Because as soon as you go over the top and start coming back down the other side, now you're setting up a fat storing metabolism. Okay, so the goal is to get to the top. So we want to look at how much carbohydrate you should be eating, the type of carbohydrate, and the timing, okay, because it's all important. So let me give you a couple scenarios with regards to that. Okay, again, we use the AIM process. We talk about eating carbohydrates in bites, so you can either increase or decrease by the amount of bites you have. You know, typically for most of it's like a half a sweet potato, half a cup of brown rice. Those are, you know, half a cup of oatmeal. Those are the things that we need. And, you know, we don't really need a lot of starch in our diet. We need enough just to do what? To run the brain and nervous system. You're better off eating half a cup at lunch and half a cup at dinner than having a whole cup at dinner, if that makes sense. Why? Because you don't need a lot to run the systems. You don't want to overload. And of course, in most Chinese restaurants, they overfeed you with starch because it's cheap. Okay, so we talked about the different types of carbohydrate. We talked about that earlier, the refined high starch. And then, of course, you have the whole wheat, and you have fruits, and you have vegetables. So I like to break things up with vegetables as starches and non-starches. So your starches are obviously your potatoes and rice, quinoa, oatmeal. Your non-starches would be like the greens, the broccoli, the kale, the spinach, and romaine lettuce, and that kind of thing. So now that we understand that, let's just keep moving here. I'm going to skip through this because this is a little too complex. I don't want to spend any time on that. Okay, carb timing strategies. Okay, I'm actually going to talk through this slide and skip the next couple of slides because it's too much verbiage. There are people who like to wake up in the morning and have their carbohydrate then. They're coming off a fast. Their muscle cells are going to be more receptive to the sugar because, again, the brain nerve system is looking for sugar as well. Some people do really well with eating their carbs in the morning and they don't eat them the rest of the day. And that works really good for them as far as fat burning, having high energy, and so forth. Some people like to eat them at lunchtime or right after an intense workout. Because right after an intense workout, your body is looking for glucose. You just burned a whole lot of it when you were exercising. So that kind of helps people to balance out their hunger and their cravings after a hard workout. And then there's people like me who prefer to have their starch at nighttime. Because to me, sleep is the number one thing on my list for the entire day. I could screw up a lot of other things, but if I'm sleeping well, I'm going to have a lot of motivation the next day to exercise. So I prefer to have my starches in the evening. Now, I'm on this diet bet with Jen Wiederstrom. Everyone knows that I'm doing that. So I'm putting starch in my diet. I am not eliminating starch for the next 30 days. But it is a nighttime starch that I'm having. And a lot of people have said to me, but Mike, isn't that going to cause you to gain weight instead of lose weight? And the answer to that is no, because I'm balancing out my hormones. I'm also not eating a high-fat diet at nighttime. So I'm adding that starch in, but there's no real fat. So tonight I had lamb stew, which basically was lamb, green vegetables, some starch, but there wasn't a lot of fat in the meal. I didn't have a salad with, olive oil-based dressing. I didn't have avocado. I'm not going to have any kind of, nuts with it or anything like that. So I end up going lower in carbs all day long, and now I'm doing my starch at nighttime for the sole purpose of helping me to fall asleep and stay asleep. And that's what works for me. See, this is why we're trying to teach you to be a food detective and not just give you a book to read and say, follow this to the letter. We're trying to teach you how to, be that barometer, look at your hunger, your energy, and your cravings, and determine when you should eat what. So some people are going to say, Mike, I get up in the morning. If I don't have oatmeal or some type of starch in the morning, I can't even get out of bed. I can't even get my day started. Fine. Some people say after a workout, I'm voracious. I got to eat my starch after my workout. That works for you. For me, I can get up in the morning. I can have eggs, turkey bacon, and spinach, and I'm out the door. For lunch, I can have a protein shake. I'm fine. I find if I don't have that starch at nighttime, A, I'll overeat at nighttime, and B, I won't sleep. So that just works for me. Your job is to figure out what works for you. You're the best barometer. Okay, and that was me eating carbs at night. It increases my serotonin levels. Okay, so these strategies, again, are not one size fits all. And if any expert tells you otherwise, they're wrong. Okay, so if you're at this stage and you want to tweak your approach to eating carbs further, consider the following. Reducing your overall starch intake. Like I said, you don't need a lot. You need just enough to run your brain and nervous system and to provide enough sugar to promote fat burning in the muscle cells. We always used to teach that fat burns in a carbohydrate flame. We talked a little bit about the mitochondria, how they burn fat and oxygen for energy. Fat and oxygen is like the dynamite, but to light the fuse, you need sugar. So you don't need a lot of sugar, you just need enough to light the fuse. Because if you look at the match, the energy coming off a match pales in comparison to the energy that is exhibited when the stick of dynamite blows up. So a little tiny match creates this huge explosion with the dynamite, right? So you don't need a lot of carbohydrate, you need enough to run the systems. That's all you need. Anything over and above that, remember we talked about carb tipping point, going over the mountain. Now you're into fat storage instead of fat burning. Okay? So fat loss formula, PFW, protein, fiber, and water. Woohoo, right? We talked about that earlier. We start every meal off with protein, fiber, and water. Then we talk about exercise intensity. Okay, at least 2 to 3 times a week, we want to get the 2 B's and the two H's. That's breathless and burning, hot and heavy. Okay, then we have sleep and hydration and stress management equals fat loss. So there's your formula, guys. That's how you do it. Okay, it's not exercise more and eat less. If someone ever says that to me after listening to me for the last 4 weeks, I'm going to jump out a window. All right, guys, that's it. That's our 4 weeks right there. Everything you need to know to be healthy and wealthy and wise I just taught you over the last 4 weeks. But everyone's going to have questions, okay? I didn't learn this in 4 weeks. It took me 32 years to learn all this. So I'm going to hang up now. I'm going to go into Facebook. I'm going to answer your questions. And again, you have access to that Facebook page. If you have questions that come up tomorrow, next week, next month, feel free to contact me. I obviously, you know, I enjoy talking about this. I want to thank everybody for spending the last 4 weeks with us. I'm so glad you did. I will be running another program probably in March. You know, we will get into the whole fat loss formula again, but the next one's going to deal a little bit more with hypertension, high cholesterol, and type 2 diabetes, because that's something we're starting to see a lot. And you know what? I'll give you a scary statistic before I hang up. In 2010, there were 5,000 documented cases of childhood type 2 diabetes. In 2015, we have over 200,000. Okay, it just that kids didn't just start eating more sugar purposefully. We got to watch what the kids are getting. Okay, we talk about some of those sports drinks. They're loaded with sugar. We got to find alternatives like ID Life Hydrate that has no sugar in it. Okay, there's a lot of things we can do. So I'm going to hang up. I'm going to jump into Facebook, guys. Take care. Contact me if you need me, and I'll see you on Facebook in a couple of minutes. Let me get out of here. Go back here.